Peter Schweizer is here, president of the Government Accountability Institute, host of the Drill Down podcast. And there's no one better at investigating. And he's got a new book. It's now crushing it on Amazon. Blood Money: Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Bold title there, Peter. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Good to be with you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You didn't hold back on the title, but the content of the book backs it up.
Yeah,
Americans are being killed.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty startling thing to say China kills Americans, and people think about COVID. Certainly, I think that's an example of it. I talk about how China maximized the body count in the United States over COVID, but they're doing it in so many different ways. Fentanyl, weapons devices that are sowing violence in the streets. It's a severe problem, and there's really two sides of this, Mike. I mean, America's on fire, and China's holding a can of gasoline, but our leaders are silent, and that's part of it. We've been under attack before, but our leaders have always stood up for us, and right now they're simply not doing that.
So let's talk about fentanyl specifically here. I mean, we can get some other ones too, but the fentanyl's the big one. And I don't know if people are like fentanyl out about talking about it or whatever. This is one of the major problems of our country. But we had a guy call in 2 days ago because I was talking about how you're coming up on Wednesday. And he said, hey, make sure you ask Peter about the opium wars.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, what about? And he's like, oh, well, this is just like retaliation for the opium wars. Like we poisoned and drugged them and now they're poisoning and killing us. And sure enough, chapter 1, the new opium wars. So take us back in time. What were the first opium wars?
Yeah, so the opium wars were really the British and some American investors. In fact, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandfather was involved in this. But they produced opium, and they sold it in China. And the Chinese government tried to halt the trade. And the British, in particular, with some American support, prevented them from stopping the trade of opium. And it reached such a critical mass that it's estimated by 1900, almost 25% of the Chinese population were addicted to opium. And it really took China from being, at the beginning of that century, an advanced major power to decimating them. And so this is still taught in Chinese schools. President Xi talks about it all the time. And yes, there's no question that this is a replay of the opium wars, although I would say, in a way, this one is even more potent because, most of the people that are dying of overdoses of fentanyl don't even know they're taking fentanyl. It's laced into other drugs, oftentimes pharmaceuticals that people think are just prescription drugs. A college student, is studying for a test and a buddy says, oh, I've got some Adderall. You want to take an Adderall so you can concentrate better. Turns out it's actually a street Adderall that is laced with fentanyl and they die. So it's a potent weapon. It's the leading cause of death of people under the age of 45 in the United States. And it is having a dramatic effect on our country. And China's involvement in this is not just the precursors. Every step, every stage of the chain of fentanyl coming to the United States has China's involvement directly in it, including the money laundering. The drug cartels used to launder their money in Latin American banks. They now launder their money in Chinese state-owned banks.
Okay, all right. I'll talk about all that stuff. The book's called Blood Money. Go buy it. You can read all about it. But just one last point on the opium wars, because you mentioned it's still taught to kids today, which makes sense if you were Chinese. So the British sold or grew opium in its Indian colonies and shipped it into China and drugged their people and destroyed. I mean, the emperor at the time was talking about it's destroying our morals and our families and our culture and people are dying. And I was like, so was that? So first question is, was that intentional? Were they like, hey, let's drug the Chinese back in the 1800s? That was my first question. And my second question was, if it's still taught our kids to Chinese kids today, I'm sure they're very bitter about it. So you could easily, if you were taught that this happened, and it seems like it did, you could be very bitter and really easily rationalize doing this back to America or the West.
Yeah, that's right, especially the West. I mean, you're right. I mean, it was really mostly a British operation. There were some American investors involved. But yes, that's right. They would grow opium. They were selling it into the Chinese market. I think by and large, for a lot of the people involved in it, it was a commercial enterprise. They made huge sums of money. There were trading companies that were known that it was said they made their reputation selling tea, but they made their profit selling opium. And that's really the way in which this was done. And yeah, you can understand why China, looking at its history, can see this as something to be angry and frustrated about. Of course, human history, you can look back 100 years, we could still be mad at the Germans and the Japanese. But I think what the CCP has done is said, we're going to use this as part of what they call disintegration warfare. That's what they describe the doctrine. And the idea is, how can we weaken and disintegrate the United States without actually fighting a battle with them? And so fentanyl has become not just a money-making scheme for them, but a stratagem to use as against the United States to weaken us. And it's working.
It's obviously in line with Sun Tzu, no question about that.
Yeah.
What really woke me up to the fentanyl thing was Fentanyl Inc. and the book, and the fact that these chemicals that are turned into fentanyl came from a quaint little town called Wuhan.
Yeah.
Did you hear? Have you ever heard about that, Peter? This little village nestled in. I was like, what are you kidding me? Wuhan? There's like 1,000 cities in China, and they come from Wuhan. Yeah. There's no way. Yeah. Okay, so we know that now, but take us along the route, because I always thought it was, okay, it starts in Wuhan, and they sell it to the drug lords in Mexico, and it's off to the races. But you say, no, China's involved the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people talk about focus on the drug cartels in Mexico, they're the junior partners. So the precursors are made in Wuhan and other parts of China, and 90% of them go to a port in Mexico called Manzanillo. It's on the west coast. At that port, the international terminal is actually run by a Chinese state-owned company called Hutchison that has a long history of cooperation with the Chinese military. So precursors come into Mexico. They come into a port illegally that is run by a Chinese company. It's then shipped north to where the Sinaloa cartel is now going to take those precursors and turn them into fentanyl. But they have the help of 2,000 Chinese nationals, according to government reports, who actually do most of that work for them. They've now got the pure fentanyl, but they need to put it into pills. They need to, create some kind of delivery mechanism. So they need to create pills. They need to create pills that look like Vicodin, that look like Adderall. So what do? They import and get pill presses from China. And according to our Department of Homeland Security, they sell those pill presses, the Chinese do, to the drug cartels at cost. In other words, they're not price gouging them. They're not trying to make a lot of money. So now they take that fentanyl that's in pill form, they transport it into the United States. Mike, if you're a drug cartel, you've got to have secure communications, right? You can't have U.S. law enforcement eavesdropping on you. So what do the Mexican cartels use? They use Chinese apps and Chinese communication devices that are encrypted in China, because they know that the Chinese will not share that information with U.S. law enforcement. So the communications devices are all based on Chinese encryption technology and Chinese devices. And then the final component is the money laundering. You're making all this money selling these illicit drugs in the United States. You've got to launder the money. Turns out the cartels used to launder their money in Latin American banks. They now launder them in Chinese state-owned bags. And in fact, according to government reports that were leaked to me, in which I quote, a lot of that money laundering is done with the assistance of Chinese students that are in the United States on visas. So this is a Chinese operation with assist from Mexico. This is not a Mexican drug cartel operation by itself.
Interesting. More than interesting. What's more than interesting? What's a level higher than interesting? That's what this is. This is damning. This is like, what the heck is wrong with us? How can we allow this to go on? And that's the essence of your book, is like turning the blind eye to it. That's amazing. Real quick on the so we've talked a lot about the amount of Chinese people coming across our southern border.
Yeah.
You put one piece of the puzzle there. Is that perhaps one reason why?
Absolutely.
Or is that just something that happens to happen?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So you've got a couple of things going on. You've got the fentanyl trade. The other thing that's happening is we have a massive problem in the United States with very potent illegal marijuana being sold. I'm not talking about the marijuana that people took in college in the 1990s. This is very potent stuff, and it's illegal because it's so potent. But there are literally hundreds, thousands of illegal marijuana grows taking place in the United States that are being run by Chinese nationals that are here illegally. In the state of Maine alone, just the state of Maine, there are 300 known illegal marijuana grows in that state that are run by Chinese nationals. In California, there are God knows how many. Law enforcement there says 97% of those illegal marijuana grows are being done by Chinese nationals who are illegally in the country. They found them in Oklahoma. So, yeah, this is sure, some of the people crossing the border are probably looking for a better life, but there is absolutely a systematic effort to bring people into the country to do us harm. And it shows this fusion between the Chinese government and Chinese organized crime. They work together. They're cooperative. President Xi has family members who are tied to Chinese organized crime. His political career, he rose to power in a province, Fujian province, which is the center of Chinese organized crime. And he sees that as a very powerful weapon to use against the United States. And an open border helps him to do that.
Unbelievable. Blood Money is the name of the book by Peter Schweizer. Listen, this is chemical warfare. I think like Ross Perot talked about this. Obviously, it's nothing like what it is now. But like, at what point do we view this as an intentional attack on Americans?
It is
Sun Tzu style attack. What do we do then?
Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, and I think this is one of the reasons you don't see much action in Washington. Part of it is you have some political leaders who are aware of this, but they have entanglements. So it's embarrassing to them and raises awkward questions, so they don't want to address it. Joe Biden being an example of that. The leader of a Chinese criminal gang, UBG, they're the gang that set up the Sinaloa cartel in the fentanyl trade, made them the kings of fentanyl. It's headed by a gentleman, Zhang Li, who goes by the name White Wolf. White Wolf had a business partner, and that business partner sent $5 million to the Biden family. So you've got, I'm not suggesting the Bidens are involved in the drug trade, but you've literally got 1 degree of separation from the people that are spreading this poison and the first family. So Joe Biden does not want to have a conversation about Chinese involvement in fentanyl. But the other problem is you've got people that may not have those entanglements in Washington, but, they'll go along to get along. They don't want to make tough choices. And based on this information, I think you're right. They are killing Americans. It is an intentional act of war. You can't have a normal relationship with that country. You can't say, let's talk about trade. Let's talk about enhancing trade. Let's talk about technological cooperation. You have to call them out. You have to challenge them on it. And I think we both know if the roles were reversed, if we were doing the opium wars against them again, they would be absolutely challenging us and talking to us about this and taking direct action. But our leaders are absolutely asleep at the switch.
So that's actually one of my questions. The book is called Blood Money. And by the way, the UBG gang is called the United Bamboo Gang.
Right.
That's kind of a silly name.
It is. It's not a scary name, but I think he makes up for with White Wolf. White Wolf is a pretty...
That's right. That's way better. One of my favorite stories was back, when was this? I'm making this up. 2006, let's say. No, it had to be longer than that. Maybe 2016. Sorry, I miss a decade or so. Yeah. And it was Leland Yee. He was a state senator in California. Yep. He was running for attorney general, and he got arrested for trafficking shoulder-fired rocket launchers and machine guns. He was a state senator from an Islamic terrorist group called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front from the Philippines, called MILF, via the head of a gang in San Francisco whose leader was called Shrimp Boy.
Yeah.
And that story.
Yep.
It's unbelievable.
Yep.
And Shrimp Boy, sorry, I just thought of Shrimp Boy there. United
Yep.
Bamboo Gang, two not threatening names. All right, you mentioned, so there's this White Wolf. Let's talk. Sorry, I'll get to White Wolf in a second. Oh, we only got 4 minutes. Darn it. Okay, here's my big question. Do we have similar control over their country? So they control our infrastructure. The FBI director talked about this the other day. You know about it more than anyone. Yep. So do we also control their ports? Do we also control their cell phone towers? Do we control their internet and their water infrastructure? Do we have the same operations over there?
No, not at all. And this was all predicated on the premise that if we do these things with China, they'll become more like us. And they haven't. Under Xi, they become more aggressive. So, they absolutely have us vulnerable. They have this strategy of disintegration warfare, and there is violence on our streets. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book is this small device called a Glock switch. You can add it to a Glock handgun, highly illegal in the United States, unless you get a very, very, very special permit. Law enforcement gets it. It turns a Glock handgun into a fully automatic machine gun. Well, the Chinese started smuggling these into the United States beginning in 2018, and according to Homeland Security, these are documents I got leaked. These switches were particularly by the Chinese targeted to criminal gangs and drug cartels operating in the United States to give them firepower against our law enforcement. And the rate of machine gun fire incidents in the country has skyrocketed. Just go on YouTube and Google, or search for Glock switch police, and you will see our police across the country driving down the street, and suddenly there's a barrage of machine gun fire from these Glock switches. And the odds are overwhelming that they came from China. And this is part of a Chinese explicit strategy to show chaos and violence in American streets. There's no question about it.
All right, I got 2 minutes, and it's good to do this in 2 minutes, right? And you can do it better than anyone. White Wolf to Biden. Take us there.
Yeah, so White Wolf is a guy with a long criminal history. He served jail in the United States for distribution of drugs. He's pro-CCP, and he's one of the leaders of the UBG gang that we talked about. And UBG in the early 2010s hooked up with the Sinaloa cartel with the cooperation of the CCP, and said to the leaders there, look, you're making money on cocaine, but we can give you a profit margin 10 times that amount with this thing called fentanyl. We'll get you the chemicals. We'll get you pill presses. We'll provide people and import them into Mexico that will help you produce this fentanyl. We will help you run the entire thing. That's what White Wolf helped to do. So White Wolf, of course, is legitimized in China. Even though he's engaged in this criminal activity, he wanders there openly. One of the business partners that he had was a gentleman named Yang Yimin, who has since disappeared. But Yang Yimin was the gentleman who gave a $5 million, quote-unquote, loan to the Biden family in 2017. And that is the 1 degree of separation you have between these activities. I would also add that Abby Lowell, who is the Biden's family lawyer, represented another Chinese businessman named Heng Lap Seng, who it turns out is widely believed to be a member of another criminal syndicate involved in the drug trade. Abby Lowell personally represented him. So you have these entanglements involving not just the Bidens, not just Abby Lowell, but others that make it very, very hard and very embarrassing for people to raise issues about China's involvement in the fentanyl trade. And that is leading to more Americans dying because they will not be confronted on these things.
Believable. Blood money. Why the powerful turn a blind eye while China kills Americans, by Peter Schweizer. That's unbelievable, but no one researches better and has the facts more than Peter. Peter, well done, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.